So, I've got to tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me at work. I'm a nurse, and I work night shifts at this hospital in a small town in northern Minnesota. You know how eerie hospitals can get at night, especially the old ones with long, dimly lit corridors and that constant, weird hospital smell. It was around 3 a.m. and things were unusually quiet. Most nights are a mix of the occasional emergency and the regular checks on patients, but that night, the silence was kind of unsettling. I was doing my rounds, walking down one of the older wings of the hospital. This part isn't used much. It's mostly storage now, but we sometimes have overflow patients there. As I'm walking, I hear this strange noise. It wasn't the typical sounds you hear in a hospital, like the beeping of machines or the distant sound of footsteps. It was this weird clicking sound, almost like someone tapping their nails on a hard surface rhythmically. It was coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. I thought maybe a patient was up and lost and needed help. I get closer to the room, and the door is slightly ajar. That's odd because we usually keep all the doors closed. I push the door open, and the room's empty, but the sound's still there, louder now. It's this weird mix of a clicking and a scraping sound, and it's coming from the bathroom. I should have called for security to look into it because no one was supposed to be in there, but I didn't. I just walked towards the bathroom. My heart was pounding, and there was this feeling in my gut telling me something's off. I reached the bathroom door, and it's slightly open too, and the sound's much clearer now. I push the door open and flick the light switch. Nothing. The light's dead. The only light is this faint, eerie glow from the hall behind me. And there, in the corner of the bathroom, is this figure. It's crouched down, facing away from me. It looks human, but off. The proportions are all wrong. Its arms are too long, and its head's tilted at an unnatural angle. I'm standing there, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing, and it turns around. Man, I will never forget that face. It looked human, but it wasn't. The eyes were too big, too dark, and the skin, it looked like it was rotting or something. It was wearing what looked like hospital scrubs, but they were torn and dirty. Then it stands up. It's towering over me, and those eyes are just staring. And then it smiles. That smile was the worst part. I should have run or screamed, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at this thing. It takes a step towards me, and that's when I hear someone else in the hall. It looks towards the door, and then back at me. For a moment, I thought it was going to attack, but it didn't. It just turned around and climbed out the small bathroom window like it was nothing. It just morphed its body and slunk out like the way an octopus can move through tiny spaces. The noise in the hall was one of the other nurses. She saw me standing there, pale as a ghost, and asked what was wrong. I couldn't even explain it. I just said I thought I saw something in the room. The nurse, let's call her Sarah, she's looking at me like I've lost my mind. I'm trying to act normal, but how can you after seeing something like that? I just mumble something about maybe a raccoon got in or something. Sarah didn't buy it, but she didn't push it either. The rest of the shift, I'm jumpy as heck. Every little sound, every shadow, it's making me think that thing is coming back. I keep thinking about its eyes, that smile. It's burned into my brain. I get through the night, but it's tough. I can't stop thinking about it. I start doing some research on my own, trying to figure out what I saw. Skinwalkers keep coming up. I read all these stories, and they're just like what I saw. A creature that can mimic humans, but it gets things wrong. It's said to be a bad omen, something you never want to encounter. Days pass, and I'm avoiding that wing like the plague. But you know how hospitals are. Eventually, you have to go where you're needed. It's about a week later, and there's an emergency. An elderly patient in that wing has taken a turn for the worse. I have no choice but to go. The whole time I'm walking there, my heart's in my throat. I'm expecting that thing to jump out at any moment, but nothing happens. I reach the patient's room, and everything's normal. The patient needs help, and I do my job. For For a moment, I let my guard down. Then, as I'm leaving the room, I hear it again. That clicking, scraping sound. It's coming from the end of the hall. I freeze. There's no way I'm going down there, but I can't just ignore it. What if it's another patient? I take a deep breath and start walking towards the sound. It's getting louder and more frantic. I reach the room where I first saw it, and the door's closed this time, but I can hear the sound clearly from inside. I don't know what came over me, but I decide to open the door. I need to know if it's real or if I'm losing my mind. I push the door open slowly, my heart pounding out of my chest. The room's empty. No creature, no skinwalker, just an old broken ventilation cover that's flapping and making that damn sound. I laugh at myself, feeling a mix of relief and stupidity. It was just a broken vent all this time. I fix it and head back to the nurse's station. But as I'm walking away, I can't shake this feeling. It felt too real, too specific. I keep looking over my shoulder the whole way back. I don't know if what I saw was real or not, but I can't deny that something strange is going on in that hospital. And I'm sorry, but there is more to this story, so just bear with me. A couple of days later, I'm on shift, and it's around 2 a.m. I'm in the break room, trying to shake off this constant feeling of being watched. Then, one of the security guys, Mike, comes in. He looks as rattled as I felt that other night. He says he's been seeing weird stuff on the security cameras, like shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, doors opening and closing on their own. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy, so seeing him like this was unsettling. He asks if I've seen anything strange. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I told him about what happened to me. His face goes pale. He says that he's heard similar stories from other night staff, too. We decide to check the security footage together. We're sitting in this tiny room, staring at these grainy screens. At first, it's all normal, but then we see it. In one of the corridors, there's this shape. It's hard to make out, but it's definitely there, moving along the wall. It's not a person. It's too distorted for that, and it's moving in this jerky, unnatural way. Mike's face says it all. He's seen a lot in his time, but nothing like this. We keep watching, and the shape moves towards the old wing, the same one where I saw that thing. The camera in that corridor is old and kind of blurry, but for a second, we see something. It's a figure stepping into one of the rooms, the same room where I heard the noises. We're both freaking out now. Mike says we should go check it out, but I'm hesitant. After what I saw, the last thing I want is to come face to face with it again. But I can't just sit there and do nothing. We make our way to the old wing, trying to be as quiet as possible. The whole hospital feels like it's holding its breath. We reach the room, and the door's slightly open, just like last time. Mike pushes it open, and we step inside. The room's empty. No creepy creature, no skinwalker, just an empty hospital room with that same cold, sterile feeling. We check the bathroom, the closet, under the bed, nothing. It's like whatever was there knew we were coming and left. We go back to the security room, not sure what to make of it all. Mike says he'll report it, but who's going to believe us? We thought we saw something on the camera, but it's gone now. It's like the hospital has its own secrets, and it's not sharing them. After that night, things went back to normal, kind of. Maybe that thing knew we were onto it and it moved on. But I still feel uneasy, especially in that old wing. I hear other staff whispering about strange sightings, weird noises. It's like the hospital's alive in a really creepy way. Okay, so check this out. This happened to my Aunt Carol, who's big into gardening and all that nature stuff. This is straight from her. Well, actually, she told it to my mom, and she's not the type to make up things. It's about this crazy creature encounter she had, right here in the States. It was somewhere in West Virginia, at her lake house, if I remember correctly. Aunt Carol loves her garden. It's her pride and joy. She's out there every day in the summer, rain or shine. So this one evening, just a couple of weeks back, she's out in the garden. It's getting dark, but she's trying to get some weeding done before calling it a night. She's got this small headlamp on, and she's really focused on her flower beds. You know how it is when you're concentrating on something and everything else kind of fades away. That's her with her flowers. Anyway, she's doing her thing, pulling out weeds, trimming dead leaves, the usual garden stuff. She's got this peaceful little routine going, and it's super quiet except for the normal evening sounds, crickets and stuff. Then she hears this weird flapping sound. Not like a bird, she said, but heavier, like a thick canvas being shaken out. She stops and listens, thinking maybe it's just the wind picking up, or she had a tarp come loose. But it's a calm night. So she stands up looking around, trying to figure out where the sound is coming from. And that's when she sees it, perched on her old oak tree. This thing. She described it as huge, with wings that looked almost like a bat's but massive. And its eyes, she said they were red, like brake lights in the dark, just staring at her. She's standing there, holding her gardening tools like they're going to do something against this giant, whatever it is. She said it looked like a moth, but the size of a man, with these dark, grayish wings. And the weirdest thing, she says it didn't seem aggressive. It was just watching her, almost curious-like. Aunt Carol, she's not easily scared, but she said this thing was crazy. She's trying to figure out if she should run or stay still. She's heard stories of the Mothman, that legend from around these parts, but she always thought it was just that, a legend. Yet here it is, this creature straight out of a campfire story, sitting in her garden. She takes a small step back, and the thing, it tilts its head, just watching her. No sound, no movement, just those bright red eyes locked on her. She said she felt this weird sense of calm, like it wasn't there to hurt her. But come on, a giant moth creature in your garden? That's not exactly a normal Tuesday night. Now remember, she's out there alone, and her phone's in the house. She's thinking, who's going to believe this? She's not sure what to do. She's caught in this standoff with this moth thing. Then, just as she's about to back away, it moves. Not towards her, but it spreads its wings. And she said they were huge, like they could wrap around her car. She's just standing there, frozen. Well, not literally frozen, but you get what I mean. She's in shock, her mind racing a mile a minute, and she's clutching her gardening shears like they're going to save her or something. Now this thing is just perched there on the tree, its red eyes fixed on her. It's eerie, she said, like something out of a movie. Then, in a split second, it spreads its wings. Aunt Carol said it was like watching a theater curtain being drawn, except way faster and way more terrifying. The wings are massive, with this intricate pattern that almost looked hypnotic under her headlamp light. She's not sure what to do, right? Run, scream, stay put? Her instincts are all over the place. But she's rooted to the spot, can't move. The creature, it doesn't make a sound, just flaps those gigantic wings a couple of times. There's this whoosh of air, and leaves start swirling around, like a mini tornado hit her garden. Then, just as she's about to muster the courage to either bolt or yell for help, the creature lifts off. It's graceful, in a weird, otherworldly way. The wings beat a few times, and it's airborne, rising higher and higher. Aunt Carol's just standing there, mouth open, watching this thing ascend. It's like everything else fades away, and it's just her and the Mothman under the evening sky. As it rises, the red eyes remain fixed on her for a moment longer, and she swears she felt like it was trying to communicate something, not in words, but like an understanding or a message being passed through their gaze. Then it was gone, blending into the night sky, leaving behind a sense of awe and a ton of questions. Aunt Carol, she's not the type to believe in supernatural stuff, but this encounter has her rattled. She heads back into her house, her hands shaking a bit, She locks the door, but keeps peeking out the window, half expecting it to return. After that night, Aunt Carol's not herself for a while. She's jittery, keeps glancing out the window whenever she's near the garden. But there's this part of her, this curious, almost obsessed part, that keeps her going back outside. Night after night, she's there, looking for it. Part of her wants to prove she wasn't just seeing things. She starts reading up on all these sightings, trying to figure out if what she saw matches other people's experiences. She's got notes, drawings, all sorts of stuff spread out on her kitchen table. It's like she's become a mini expert on Mothman lore. A few weeks pass, and she's out in the garden again, when suddenly, there it is, perched in the same spot as before. This time, she's more prepared, less scared. She stands there, watching it, and it watches her back. Then, out of nowhere, it lets out this sound, not quite a screech, more like a deep hum. It sounds almost mournful, if that makes sense. She feels this wave of emotion, like it's communicating something. Then, it spreads its wings and takes off into the night. That's the last time she's seen it. She keeps gardening, keeps watching the skies, but the creature hasn't returned yet. It's like it just came to say goodbye in its own bizarre way. All right, let me tell you about this one time I had the weirdest encounter out in my cornfield. You're not going to believe this, but I swear on my life that every word is true. My family has been farming this land in north-central Iowa for as long as I can remember. My dad passed it down to me, and it's been my life ever since. This happened last summer, just around the time when the corn's about ready for harvesting. The sun was setting, and I remember thinking that this is one of those evenings that makes you really glad to live out in the countryside. So I'm out there checking the crops, making sure everything's set for the next day. I always liked walking through the fields in the evening, helps me clear my head. It was quiet, real quiet, except for the sound of the wind moving through the corn stalks. That's when I first heard it, a strange, soft, kind of shuffling sound coming from deeper inside the field. Now I've dealt with coyotes, raccoons, all sorts of critters trying to get into the crops, but this was different. It wasn't an animal sound and was almost like a rumbling that made the ground vibrate. At this point, I was more curious than anything, and I decided to check it out. I walked towards the sound, pushing through the rows of corn. The stalks were tall, over my head, so I couldn't see much ahead of me. As I got closer, that shuffling sound got more distinct, like something was moving, but trying to be quiet. Then, just as I was about to reach the area I was hearing it from, it stopped. Everything went silent. No sound, not even the wind. It was eerie. I stood there, listening, waiting for something to happen. That's when I saw it, through a break in the corn stalks. This thing was tall, way taller than any person, and it was sort of hunched over. Its skin was pale, almost white, and it looked sickly, emaciated. Its arms were long, reaching down almost to the ground, and its fingers, they were elongated, ending in what looked like claws. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My brain was fried looking at it. I mean, this was way beyond anything normal. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't seem to notice me at first. It was just standing there, swaying slightly, like it was sniffing the air. Then it turned its head towards me. It didn't have any hair, and its face was the most horrible thing. It had these deep, sunken eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light, and a mouth that was way too wide, filled with sharp teeth. I was just standing there staring at this thing, this crawler, as I've realized it is called. It made a sound then, a low, hissing noise, and started to move towards me, slowly, like it was being really cautious or maybe curious. I don't know. I couldn't tell what it was thinking. I've never felt my heart pound that hard. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was flashing through my mind. But this was real. This was happening to me. As it came closer, its movements were unnerving. It was jerky in the way it moved, sort of a lurching, awkward gait that made it seem like it was struggling with each step. But at the same time, it was quick, faster than you'd think looking at it. The way it moved among the corn stalks was almost snake-like, slithering and sliding. I could hear its breathing now, a raspy, labored sound. I remember thinking how this thing didn't seem right, like it didn't belong in our world. Its eyes never left me, those glowing, unblinking orbs that seemed to pierce right through me. I stumbled a few times, my boots getting caught in the dirt and the stalks cutting at my face and hands. Each time I feared it would be right on top of me, but I kept getting up, kept pushing forward. I could see the edge of the cornfield and my barn in the distance, the safe haven. The thought of reaching my truck, getting out of there, was the only thing driving me. But then, I made a fatal mistake. I looked back, just a quick glance over my shoulder, but that was enough. The creature was closer than I thought, just a few yards away. That's when I noticed something else. It wasn't just moving towards me. It was mimicking my movements. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed, it slowed, like it was playing some twisted game. I turned back around and pushed myself harder. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but fear is a powerful motivator. I burst out of the cornfield, stumbled into the open field. That's when I heard it, a loud, piercing shriek that I know came from the creature. It was a sound full of anger and frustration, like it was annoyed that I'd escaped. None of it made sense, but I didn't stop to think. I just ran to my truck, fumbled with the keys, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even look back until I was miles away and off the farm. When I finally stopped, my whole body was shaking. I just sat there in the truck, trying to think about it all and catch my breath. Obviously, I had to head back home eventually, but when I did, I went right inside and straight to bed. It's hard to describe how you feel after an encounter like that. You start to doubt yourself, wonder if your mind was going crazy. But ultimately, I know what I saw, and I know I never want to see it again. So, I gotta tell you about this insane thing that happened to me. It was in this small town in Montana where I have a cabin. It's right on the edge of this dense forest. The locals always talk about how weird it is near the forest, but I never believed any of that hocus-pocus stuff. I was there for some quiet time. First day, everything's normal. I'm staying in my tiny cabin, pretty basic but cozy. I decided to take a hike, see the sights. The forest is massive, and it's easy to feel like you're the only person in the world out there. Tall trees, the sound of a creek nearby, birds doing their thing. It was peaceful. It was getting late, and I was about to head back when I heard this weird noise. It was this low, strange sound, almost like a whisper or someone talking really quietly and hiding their voice, but not quite. I thought maybe it was the wind or something, but that didn't feel right. I shook it off and kept walking. Then I saw it. It was crouched by the creek. Its skin had this weird, scaly texture, kind of like a lizard, but it was huge. And its eyes, they were this piercing yellow. It was drinking from the creek, and I swear, when it looked up and saw me, my blood turned cold. I stood there, not moving, just staring at this thing. It was staring right back at me, and I could feel it, like it was trying to decide what to do with me. I've never felt so scared in my life. It wasn't just the way it looked, but the whole vibe was wrong. It felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I'd walked into something I wasn't meant to see, like it hadn't expected me to discover it. The weirdest part was, it didn't attack or anything. It just kept looking at me, then it turned and walked away without even a second thought. Not like an animal would, but like it had some purpose, like it knew where it was going. It walked upright, sort of hunched over, and disappeared into the trees. I remember thinking, I need to get out of here. But my legs, they wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, eyes locked on where the creature had been. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It was like my brain couldn't accept what had just happened. Then I heard it again, that low, weird sound, but closer this time. It was coming from the direction the creature had gone. I felt this urge to follow the sound, like something was pulling me towards it. I know it sounds crazy, but it was like I was being drawn in against my better judgment. So I started walking, slowly, trying to be as quiet as I could. Every step felt like an eternity. The forest around me seemed to change. The trees looked darker. The air felt colder. I could still hear the creak, but it sounded different, almost like I was hearing it in a dream or underwater. Basically, all of my senses were misfiring at this point. I walked for what felt like miles, following that sound. It was getting darker, and the forest felt strange. I started seeing things, shadows moving between the trees, flashes of that scaly skin in the corner of my eye. I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Finally, I saw it again, the creature, but this time it wasn't alone. There were others, 3 or 4 of them, all standing around this clearing. They were communicating, I think, in that same low sound that was so enticing to me. It wasn't loud, but it filled the air, vibrating through the ground. I hid behind a tree, watching them. They were tall with long arms and legs. Their movements were deliberate, almost graceful in a weird, terrifying way. They didn't seem to notice me, or maybe they just didn't care, knowing I couldn't do anything to them. That's when I realized, whatever they were doing, it was important, a sacred ritual maybe. I got the sense that this was their place, their territory, and I was an intruder. The way they moved, the sounds they made, it was like I was witnessing something ancient, something that had been happening for centuries. I don't know how long I stood there watching them. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours, but eventually, the creatures began to disperse, melting back into the forest like they were part of it. And as they left, that heavy feeling in the air started to lift. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, until the forest felt normal again. Then I ran, as fast as I could, back to the cabin. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. All I knew was I needed to get away from there, away from them. Back at the cabin, I locked the door, closed the curtains, and tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of the light and the forest. But deep down, I knew it was real. I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to, something that changed the way I look at the world. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the forest, wondering about those creatures. What were they? Why were they there? And the biggest question of all, what would have happened if they'd seen me?